Now, Chris Froome is not only one of the most successful Ineos Grenadiers of all time, he is also one of the, if not the most successful general classification rider of his generation. So I thought now will be the perfect opportunity to take a look back at some of Chris Froome's biggest moments throughout his career as he heads to Israel Startup Nation for next year. This is Chris Froome's top 10 biggest moments at Team Sky / Ineos Grenadiers. Now, in at number 10 is the London Olympic time trial. Froome and Wiggins were both coming off a very successful 2012 Tour de France in which Chris Froome finished second. We'll talk about that later on. But coming into the Olympics, he managed to take it to some of the best time trialers in the world and come away with his first ever Olympic medal. He managed to bag a bronze medal, finishing behind Bradley Wiggins and Tony Martin, but ahead of some of the world's best time trialists. It was his first ever Olympic medal, and yeah, some of the purists amongst us might not see this as one of his biggest achievements, but for me personally, I think it is one of his biggest achievements, his first ever Olympic medal. Now, in at number 9 is stage 8 of the 2016 Tour de France from Pau to Bourgogne de Luchon. I don't know. Anyway, as a climbing specialist, you'd expect Chris Froome to be attacking on the ascent. You wouldn't ever think to see him attack on the descent, but that's exactly what he did. As he crested the ascent with the rest of the GC contenders in tow, he decided that that would be the perfect opportunity to lay down one of the best attacks I have ever seen from Chris Froome. He took it to them, and he made the super tuck infamous. Yeah, it's dangerous, but we saw loads of adults and loads of kids trying to emulate Chris Froome down this descent. Just because Froome is doing it, don't do it. And I'll reiterate that. Don't try the super tuck. It's bloody dangerous. But looks good, especially when he's pedalling furiously. But hey, it paid off. He managed to take the victory on the stage, and in that moment he made the super tuck pretty famous. Yeah, he didn't invent it, but he made it blooming famous.
The cycling world has woken up on Wednesday to the news that 4-time Tour de France winner Chris Froome has failed a drugs test.
Now, in at number 8, and I didn't say that this list was going to be all cupcakes and rainbows, and unfortunately for Chris Froome, the Salbutamol case is going to stick with him like it's on his shoe. Right, even into retirement, people are still going to bring it up. People are still going to talk about it. Now, during doping control after stage 18 of the 2017 La Vuelta, Froome returned an adverse analytical finding in his A sample, which was confirmed by his B sample to contain an amount of salbutamol, which was above the amount allowed by the UCI and WADA. Now, although technically he failed this test, he wasn't banned. He was allowed to continue riding, and we wouldn't have got wind of any of this, I don't think, had we not had it leaked by some of the newspapers. But this case was eventually dropped against Froome after the UCI and WADA couldn't really find enough proof that he'd actually taken more than the amount allowed by them, even though there was more in his system. But there's evidence to say that his system could have created more of it, or I don't know. I'm no doctor, I'm not even getting into it. Now, as I say, even though he was cleared of any charges and any wrongdoing, the Court of Public Opinion decided that Froome was guilty, and yeah, anything post salbutamol case is always going to be tinged with a hint of potential cheating with those naysayers of Chris Froome. But on this one, leave your comments down below. Is this something that still affects him, do you think, with his career? Do you think people are still wary of him because of this, or do you think that it was a genuine case of he stuck to the rules within his TUE? In at number 7, and Chris Froome takes up duathlon. One of the most bizarre things you will ever see in the 2016 Tour de France is watching the yellow jersey running up Mont Ventoux. Now, when the cameras cut to him, we had no idea what the hell was going on. We had no idea where his bike was. I personally thought his bike had been stolen, but it wasn't until we saw the replay of Richie Porte stacking it into the back of a camera bike and bringing down various other riders that we realised that Froome was involved in that. His bike had been damaged beyond repair, and yeah, instead of waiting, he decided to go running. That proves what kind of mentality Chris Froome has. Always wanting to progress, always wanting to go forward, never wanting to stand still. He might have only had to wait 30, 40 seconds, but he knew that 200 metres up the road is better than 200 metres down the road. So yeah, has this ever happened before? Have we ever seen this happen in a race before, where a rider has just got off their bike for whatever reason and started running? I can't think of any. In at number 6 is the 2011 Vuelta. There's Froome standing on the podium in second place ahead of the eventual 2012 winner of the Tour de France, Bradley Wiggins. And both of those behind the eventual winner of the 2011 La Vuelta, which was Juan Jose Cobo. Now, at this moment in time, this was the best Grand Tour placing of any British... I think it was. I'm sure it was. It was the best place of any British rider, but we still wanted that elusive Grand Tour winner within Great Britain. That would come a year later with Bradley Wiggins. But after years and years and years and years, Juan Jose Cobo eventually got popped for doping, and his 2011 La Vuelta was taken away from him and given to Chris Froome, which in some weird karmic justice after what happened in 2012 meant that Chris Froome would become Britain's first ever Grand Tour winner, taking that title away from Bradley Wiggins. In at number 5, and it's his Dauphiné TT crash. Yeah, it wasn't nice. But again, it was one of those moments that defines Chris Froome's career. So there's Froome heading out on his recon ride with Wout Poels. It was a windy day. You can see here he tried to put his cape on and he wasn't very stable. He tried to blow his nose going down a descent at around 37 miles an hour. The wind took his front wheel. It veered him off course and he ended up hitting a brick wall, fracturing his elbow, fracturing ribs, breaking his leg and putting himself into a serious state. It was in intensive care for a few weeks and it looked, for all intents and purposes, that this was the end of Chris Froome's career. There was no need for him to try and get back on this one. There was no need for him to try and fight for a 5th Tour de France victory. The man had achieved everything he needed to. If this was the moment he said, you know what, I've had enough, everyone would have said that's fine. But Froome is Froome, and he wouldn't let it lie. And we'll move on to the next moment of his career in a second. But this really was massive. There was talk, there was speculation that Chris Froome had faked all of this, that Team Sky had faked all of this because he needed to serve a 6-month doping ban. I mean, that was great for the views of the channel, but I never believed that. That's not something you can fake. That really isn't something you can fake. And hey, if you want to get involved in the comments down below, then I'm all for a little debate. But in at number 4 was the recovery that Chris Froome made after this Dauphiné recon crash. Like I said earlier, he could have easily just quit. He could have easily have took his foot off the gas, but he didn't. He came back and he was trying to come back as strong as ever. He had months and months of rehab, months of recovery, and it took him all the way up until February, March time, and the first race he attended was the United Arab Emirates Tour, and yeah, he was nowhere. Now, like everybody else, I'm sure, I wanted Froome to be back on form. I wanted him to be back at the top, as good as he was prior to this crash, but really, realistically, was that ever going to happen after such a massive crash? At his age, probably not. And I think a lot of people put a lot of pressure on him. He probably never felt it because he probably doesn't read social media, but a lot of people were expecting him to come back as strong as he was, and unfortunately that wasn't the case. But that doesn't take away from an amazing recovery that he made after that crash. That, I mean, it could have potentially stopped him walking, let alone getting on a bike again. So kudos to Chris Froome for getting back on the bike and getting anywhere near the level he was at previous to that crash. In the number 3 is that awkward moment when you realise your team leader isn't quite as strong as your domestique, but you've put far too much effort into that team leader to relinquish that lead and allow that domestique to go up the road and win the Tour de France. This was, of course, 2012 Tour de France, with Chris Froome trying his hardest not to drop Bradley Wiggins. It was like a 17-year-old on a promise trying to hold himself back. Froome could have taken the stage. He could have taken that yellow jersey. He could have just decimated the field. But unfortunately, that wasn't the way the script was written for 2012. We had the Olympics coming up in London. We had the poster boy in Bradley Wiggins. And what we wanted to do at the Olympics was make sure that we had our first ever Tour de France victor in Bradley Wiggins. And unfortunately for Chris Froome, that meant that he had to play second fiddle, and he played it. Yeah, I mean, he played it relatively well. He must have been spewing, and there has been fallout ever since that 2012 Tour de France between Chris Froome and Bradley Wiggins. I don't know what the situation is now, but it's probably fine now. They probably don't care. But back then, there was a lot of needle going on. Alejandro Valverde eventually took that stage victory, and Chris Froome, in a show of defiance, I don't know if that was the case or if he was genuinely trying to tow Bradley Wiggins up to the line, but in the last couple of 100 metres of that stage, he was sprinting like his heart depended on it. I think we all know, realistically, that if it was anybody else other than Bradley Wiggins in that yellow jersey, the team would have let Froome go up the road. I'm sure of it. I'm convinced that would have been the case. In at number 2 now, I'm not sure if this should be on Froome's highlight reel or Richie Porte's highlight reel, because this was some serious domestiquing duties. So Porte had managed to ride every single high caliber climber off his wheel in the 2013 Tour de France, leaving only Alberto Contador and Chris Froome in his wake. Nairo Quintana was up the road, and it looked like it was going to be a straight up race between Contador and Froome. But when Froome launched his attack, I mean, this looked like something out of one of my spin classes. The speed of that cadence was absolutely insane, but even Bertie couldn't keep up with him. Eventually Froome would catch Quintana. Quintana would try and stay on his wheel for as long as possible, but even then Froome had another dig and another attack, and he broke the will of literally every single rider there. And that's a rare thing you don't see often nowadays, is that yellow jersey taking it to the rest of them, putting in digs, putting in attacks. I mean, hey, Primož Roglič should have been watching this one, because Froome decimated the field. He took the victory on Mont Ventoux and eventually taking his first ever Tour de France victory back in 2013 with it. It was a phenomenal attack. One that'll go down in the history books, that's for sure. And in at number 1 is, of course, his epic 80-kilometre solo ride at the 2018 Giro d'Italia. Now, if I've left out any of Chris Froome's top moments that you feel that should be in here, then leave your comments down below. I'd like to know what your favourite Chris Froome moment is, whether it's on the bike or off the bike, whether it's good or whether it's bad. Let us know in the comments down below. But I don't think anyone can argue with this moment. We've made a video on this in the past, and it was... even now, I really don't know what to say about it. So heading into stage 19, he was almost 3 minutes down on GC, and Froome really had nothing to lose. And when he started his attack at 80 kilometres to go, his rivals must have just looked at each other and said, just let him. What an idiot, just let him go. But as he reached the summit of the Finestra, he had over 30 seconds on the group behind him, which contained Dumoulin, and he already had over 10 minutes on the Maglia Rosa, which was Simon Yates. He'd capitulated like a bad boy. And then as Froome headed into the finish, still out on his own, he had over 3 minutes on that Dumoulin group, which meant he would go into the Maglia Rosa by 40 seconds as they headed into the final 2 stages, and he would take the 2018 Giro d'Italia victory. So there you go, Chris Froome's top 10 biggest moments in his career. Like I said before, make sure you leave your comments down below and let us know what your favourite Chris Froome moment was. Am I right? Am I wrong? I don't know. You decide. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure if you've enjoyed this video, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. If you've disliked the video for whatever reason, then hit that dislike button. But above all, leave your comments down below, and we will see you on the next one.